In this video and the following videos, we will discuss the relationship between learning and illness. One may ask about the relationship between illness and learning. May ask why you relate illness to learning. You may ask or say, for no apparent reason, you relate illness or disorder to learning. Learning is supposed to be positive issue, while illness is negative one. Let us try to make it more clear and solve this dilemma. Illness is a disease or period of sickness affecting the body or mind. It is a disorder of structure or function in a human, animal, or even plant. It produces specific symptoms. And as you know, symptom is a physical or mental feature which is regarded as indicating a condition of disease, particularly such a feature that is apparent to the patient. Who denies the connection between learning and illness? Consider learning only as a process through which we acquire new information or build on information previously learned. But learning means the alteration or a changing of behavior as a result of individual experience. So according to learning, you can learn good behavior or bad behavior, normal behavior or abnormal behavior, positive habit or bad habit, and the role of learning may be apparent in acquired disease. I mean, because through learning, we can learn normal behavior or abnormal behavior, bad behavior or good behavior, positive habit or bad habit. So the role of learning may be apparent in acquired disease. What is the meaning of an acquired disease? An acquired disease is one that began at some point during one's lifetime, as opposed to disease that was already present at birth, which is congenital disease or other diseases in which heredity play an important role. And according to the learning theory, phobias, for example, develops when fear responses are reinforced or punished. So phobia is an acquired disease. And you have to remember that, as we said before, the role of learning may be apparent in acquired disease. Now we will look at phobia. Phobia is some sort of fear, and although fear plays an important role in human development, adaptation, and ultimately survival, fear can be disabling when it manifests itself as a phobia or an anxiety disorder. And you have to know that effective treatment for fear-based disorders like phobia depends upon the basic science that inform theories about the origins of fear and about how fear is learned. The most common specific phobias are like as claustrophobia. It means fear of being constricted or confined, fear of being in constricted or confined spaces. Aerophobia, it means fear of flying. Driving phobia, fear of driving a car. Emetophobia, fear of vomiting. Hypochondria, fear of becoming or being ill. Zoophobia, fear of animals. Aquaphobia, fear of water. acrophobia, fear of heights; blood, injury, and injection phobia, or which is referred to as BII phobia, blood, injury, and injection phobia. It means fear of injuries involving blood; scalophobia, fear of skeletors; tunnel phobia, fear of tunnels. Okay, this is some of common specific phobias. In our discussion in this chapter, we will discuss some theories that may contribute to the explanation of phobia and give suggestions for treatment. In this presentation, we will cover the following items. Number one, what about the definition of learning? Number two, what is the difference between learning and maturation? Number three, what do we really learn? Number four, how does learning take place? Number five, what are the factors that influence or affect learning? Learning theories can answer the last two questions. The last two questions, how does learning take place and what are the factors that influence or effective learning, can be answered by the learning theories. And we will cover two approaches in learning. The first approach, it is referred to as associative theories, and we will cover two common theories such as classical conditioning theories introduced by Ivan Petrovich Pavlov and operant conditioning theory which introduced by Skinner. It is also referred to as instrumental conditioning. Then the second approach that we will cover is cognitive theories, and we will cover one of the most common cognitive theories. It is referred to as Bandura's social learning theory, or it is also referred to as learning by observation. Now we have to move on to the definition of learning. As we said before, learning means the alteration or changing behavior as a result of individual experience. What is the definition of learning? A relatively permanent. So we are talking about permanent change. Permanent change means it is not temporary change. So we have permanent change in the behavior as a result of practice or training. Again, the definition, a relatively permanent, it means lasting or intended to last or remain unchanged indefinitely, permanent change in behavior, and the change may be positive or negative. Permanent change in behavior, and you have to remember that if we are talk about behavior, we cover the two kinds of behavior: overt behavior, which is observable, directly observable, and covert behavior, which is indirectly observable, which is private and internal, and we cannot observe this behavior directly, but we can observe it if we would be able to convert it into overt behavior. So again, the definition of learning, a relatively permanent change. And as we said before, permanent means lasting or intended to last for or remain unchanged indefinitely. And change means that may be positive or negative in behavior. Either we are talking about overt or covert behavior as a result of practice or training. For the last time, this definition of learning, a relatively permanent change in behavior as a result of practice or training. So the changes in behavior which result from factors such as drugs, fatigue, The damage to the central nervous system are not considered the learned behavior. Why? Because changes which result from drugs or fatigue are temporary state of changes. They are not permanent changes, and the damage to the changes in behavior which result from damage to the central nervous system are not considered the learned behavior because they are not a result of training or practice. Now, what is the difference between learning and maturation? Maturation also is a change in behavior, but resulting from natural growth of the nervous system or the nervous structure. It is not resulting from training or practice. And the maturation of a function is a prerequisite for training that function to take place. For example, walking or speaking cannot be learned until the relevant physiological and the natural components have matured. So, uh, maturation is a prerequisite for learning. Now the question is, what do we learn? We learn most of our behaviors, abilities, skills, motives, attitudes, language, and even some personality traits. We learn also good behavior, bad behavior, normal behavior, abnormal behavior, positive habit, bad habit, and this is the link between phobia or the disorder and the learning. And through learning, the instructor or advisor can alter behavior, can change the behavior by establishing new habits, strengthening some certain responses, or inhibiting or deforming habits, weakening certain responses. So we can establish new habits, new behavior, and also we can deforming or inhibiting some habits or some behavior or some responses. Now we have two main questions. Question number one, how does learning take place? Question number two, what are the factors that influence or affect learning? And these two questions can be answered by the learning theories. We have two approaches. We will cover two approaches in learning theories. Approach number one is referred to as associative theory. According to them, learning equals habit information or to form an association between a stimulus and the response. This is the meaning of learning according to them. And we will explain that enough when we will talk about the two theories included in the associative approach, classical conditioning and instrumental conditioning. And we have two examples. We will cover two examples, as I said. Classical conditioning theory introduced by Ivan Petrovich Pavlov, operant conditioning theory, or it is also referred to as instrumental conditioning theory. It is introduced by Skinner. The second approach is cognitive theories. We will cover one of the most common theories involved in the cognitive approach. It is referred to as social learning theory, introduced by Bandura. It is also referred to as learning by observation. According to them, the main question is how the brain deal with the incoming stimulus. How does the brain process the incoming stimulus or stimuli in order to respond to it or to this stimuli? So they emphasize the role of thinking, understanding, memory, and other cognitive processes in learning. The effect of this cognitive abilities, cognitive functions in learning. So we have to approach in the first one, learning just means habit formation, or to form an association between incoming stimulus or stimuli and your response or responses. And we have two examples: classical conditioning theory and instrumental conditioning theory. But according to cognitive approach, the main emphasis is on the relationship between learning and the other cognitive abilities, and the role of these cognitive abilities on learning. So how does the brain process or deal with the incoming stimulus in order to respond to it? Now I would like to recap what we covered in this video in brief. Firstly, we discussed why we are interested in relating the learning to illness. And as we said before, you may ask why you relate illness the disorder to illness to learning. It is supposed that learning is a positive issue while illness is negative one. But as we know, who denies the connection between learning and illness? Just to consider learning as only a process through which we acquire new information or build on information previously learned. But really, the role of learning may be apparent in acquired disease. And as we said before, acquired disease that it is a disorder or disease began at some point during one's lifetime. It is not congenital disease, and heredity play not important role in developing this acquired disease. And the phobia is one example of this acquired disease. So according to learning theories, phobia, for example, develops when fear responses are reinforced or punished. So we start our journey in this chapter to discuss some theories that may contribute to the explanation of phobia and give suggestions for treatment. Then we covered in this video five main points. Number one, the definition of learning. Number two, what is the difference between learning and maturation, and what do we learn, and how does learning take place? And the last point, what are the factors that influence or affect learning? And as I said before, the last two questions, how does learning take place, or what are the factors that influence or affect learning, can be answered by the learning theories. Uh, the definition of learning, as we said before, it is a relatively permanent change. So it is not temporary change, but permanent change in behavior. And a change means that positive change or negative change in behavior. So we are talking about overt behavior and covert behavior as a result of practice or training, and some changes that result from factors such as drugs, fatigue, damage to the central nervous system are not considered learned behavior, because either they are temporary changes, or they are not a result of training and practice. And the difference between learning and maturation: maturation is a prerequisite for training that function to take place. So maturation is a prerequisite for learning, and the maturation is a change also in behavior, either overt or covert behavior, but resulting from natural growth of the nervous system. What do we learn? We learn most of our behaviors, most of our abilities, skills, motives, attitudes, language, and even some personality traits. Good behavior, bad behavior, positive habit, negative habit, normal behavior, abnormal behavior. And through learning, we can establish new habits, new behaviors, and also we can inhibit or deform bad habits or bad behaviors. And this is the key in treating phobia, as we will discover later on. How to inhibit phobic behavior, to deform phobic behavior or phobic reactions. This is the key in the treatment of behavior, and we can know that from learning theories. And this is the link between learning and illness. How does learning take place, and what are the factors that influence or affect learning? As we said before, we have two approaches. We will cover two approaches. In approach number one, learning equals, according to them, learning equals habit formation, or to form an association between stimulus and response. And we have two kinds of theories included in the associative approach: classical conditioning theory, which introduced by Pavlov, and the instrumental conditioning theory, which is introduced by Skinner. On the other side, we have cognitive approach. According to them, the main question: how does the brain process or deal with the incoming stimulus in order to respond to it? So they emphasized the role of other cognitive functions, such as thinking, understanding, memory, attention, and other cognitive processes. That's all today in our first video about the relationship between learning and illness. Thank you.